Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. On behalf of Strategy, and it's a pleasure to sponsor once again this conference, given our close linkages with the London Business School. His Excellency, Dr. Sheikh Mohammed, laid a great foundation for what I'm about to share with you. We haven't aligned at all our speeches, but I was listening to Your Excellency, and I'm going to expand on some of the themes that you've touched upon. In the course of our work with governments in the region, the one beyond the geopolitics, frankly, that we can all read in the newspapers or hear on TV, the one issue that constantly comes back in every single discussion is the one of employment. As you mentioned, employment in general is bad in the region. Youth employment is twice as high as the average employment in the region, and the region needs to create tens of millions of jobs in the coming years, and the question is how. Traditionally, governments, particularly oil-rich governments, used to act as the employer of last resort. And if you read the fine prints of what ministers of finance, ministers of economy, ministers of planning have been saying in the last couple of years, there's clearly the signaling that even the richest of governments in the region can no longer afford to be the employer of last resort, can no longer afford the subsidies that are being provided at the level that they are provided at left, right, and center, and that it is time to really let the private sector take up the slack and flourish. If you look at the part of the economy in MENA that is not related directly or indirectly to oil, family businesses contribute almost 80% of non-oil GDP, 80%. If you take the top 10 family businesses of the MENA region, they employ 220,000 people, just 10 families, think about it. And so how family businesses think about their future is absolutely essential to the issue of economic growth in the MENA region, is absolutely essential to the economic stability of the region, and is essential to employment in the region. Thank you. So when we talk to business leaders at large, 2/3 of them believe the assertion that family businesses play an important role in securing economic stability. And about half believe that family businesses will be able to regenerate, to reinvent themselves, to endure for the next generation or two. Yet, whether you look at it from a Middle Eastern point of view or whether you look at it from a global point of view, very few family businesses survive the third generation. Okay, so what can we do, or what should family businesses do about that? Three sets of questions. First, what kind of challenges are they likely to face, whether internally focused or external challenges? Second, what can they do about it? And the third question, coming back to a theme that Your Excellency, you mentioned, what is the role of women in the future development of family businesses? We believe that this is a perfect ground to empower female workforce and to encourage the female part of the active population to take on a much, much bigger economic and social role. So let me tackle each of those in turn. If you think about some of the internal challenges, there are many of them, but I'd like to focus on three. There is an issue of leadership. Traditionally, the family businesses start with a founder or two that are very closely knit together, supported by advisors. And then, over time, over decades, there is a dilution, very naturally, of control and decision making. There is significant pressure on the next generation to maintain the legacy of the founder. Easier said than done. There is also a challenge in the size of the family. As second, third generation take on, you start adding up, cousins and so, and very quickly you find that there may be tens and tens of people within the family who are entitled to play or not a role in running the family businesses. And these bring to the table very different aspirations. Some family members in the third generation want to be absolutely active in the business. Others want to do something outside of the family business perimeter. Others want to have nothing to do with business. They want to do philanthropy or nothing sometime. So how do you combine all of these different aspirations together? And finally, there is a challenge around the business model where many family businesses have thrived with different businesses in different sectors, in different countries. How can, in today's world, can you compete and be at the top of the game in many, many different businesses in many, many different countries? Again, a very tough one to answer. Externally, well, we all know about the challenges of the economy, particularly in the last 5 or 7 years. The volatility of oil prices obviously does not always help. Industries are transforming. Technology is disrupting many business models, rendering old business models obsolete, and businesses have to reinvent themselves. If you go back in time in the 70s, economies in the GCC used to be, by and large, quite closed, i.e. the local player, the local entrepreneur, the local distributor used to be quite shielded from outside competition. Well, with WTO and different players coming into the market, this is putting pressure on their ability to compete and win business. And finally, from a financing perspective, to keep growing, you need access to financing. Banks used to be quite, I would say, generous in providing financing to those businesses. This is no longer the case for a variety of reasons. And by the way, this also brings to bear the question of how much can family members afford or want to re-inject some of their own financial holdings into the businesses to keep on competing. So quite a complicated set of questions. The answers lies, in general, in trying to institutionalize the way business is conducted in this environment. And there are a few reasons why this can and should happen. So the drivers for these can be A, let us take advantage of the fact that the founder or the sons of the founders are few and still active in the business to drive that institutionalization. I've worked with maybe 15 of the top 20 families in the region. And when you're talking about this kind of issues with the founder or 2 or 3 brothers, it's so much easier to get something enacted, something done, something enforced, than if you wait 10 or 15 years later and have to talk and get 15, 20, 25 cousins to agree on the same. Almost impossible unless someone who has the legitimacy to impose and say it has to be done this way. It is almost impossible to get it done when you get to the third generation. And that is why, by the way, third generation family businesses typically fail. So there is the founders, given the history of the Middle East, the growth in the 70s and in the 80s and so on, the founders or the second generation is still around and is still in a position to get things of the sort done. The second driver for this to happen is that the third generation is starting to come to the active marketplace. And they want to be part of it. And they want to do something. And so that is putting, bottom-up pressure on this to be taken care of. The third one is that you need, as a family member, to prepare for succession and agree on the rules of the game. Who's going to take the helm next, who's going to lead what, who's going to be doing what. And so dealing with the issues of succession, whether from a family perspective or shareholder perspective, becomes very important. And again, adds pressure to the need to institutionalize. And finally, there is a need to adapt to the business conditions, to disruptive technology, and so on. And so there is a burning, what we in our business call a burning platform. There is a burning platform for this decentralized to take place. Failure to do so, in fact, will basically jeopardize the sustainability of those businesses, because the family size is rapidly expanding. So many more shareholders, many people who have a say in it, that you cannot align easily. Some family members want to exit the business, give me the cash, and I just, let me go. How do you deal with this? Family members or founding members getting old, at some point in time passing away and not able to push for that. And frankly, in many cases, we've seen some families firefighting to keep the businesses afloat and not being able to devote the time to think about these kinds of issues. So there is a major reason, a major burning platform, frankly, to institutionalize those businesses. There are 4 pillars, we believe, to getting this institutionalization done. The first one is around protecting and strengthening the foundations. What do we mean by this? It means developing a resilient family governance model. How will the family manage the businesses? What role will it have in this business for the coming 20, 30, 40 years? I'll come back to these in a second. The second one is take a hard look at the business, a very objective look at the business, and develop a growth strategy with the right to win. Very few companies nowadays can afford to be in 40 different businesses, many countries, and be able to win day in, day out in all of these. The third one is about strengthening capabilities at the family level, at the holding level, to be able to manage those businesses. And finally, to think about how best to utilize and redeploy capital employed within the business. I'm not going to cover all of these, but touch on a few of them. So the first one, which is probably the pillar, I would say the most important discussion that one has to have with family members, is around governance. How do you separate ownership, shareholdership from management? Are all family members entitled to have a job in the family business? So a whole set of questions around what is the role of the family in impacting the business. And the model that we've been working on and implementing with the families that we've been working with in the Middle East and elsewhere is quite simple. I'll just touch on it. Think of it, it all starts with the family assembly. Think of the family assembly or the general assembly of shareholders in a publicly quoted companies. So everyone who has a share of that business. Typically from there on, we go to having this assembly select in a variety of ways, a family council or a shareholder council. This could be one of the same. These are selected representatives from the entire General Assembly that will speak and oversee on behalf of the multiple shareholders. So you see, we're starting to bring some order into how the voice of the shareholders is being channeled into the business. But from there on, what's very important is to separate what we call family institutions from the business. On the business, it's quite simple. Typically, these council, the shareholder council or family council, would decide, again, there's a variety of ways to do it, on who would represent the family in the various boards, either the holding boards or the company boards, and be the voice of the family in those companies. They would decide what are the rules of the game when it comes to employment of family members in the family. Is everyone entitled to a job there? If yes, what are the conditions to get there? Another thorny issue, and this is where you see that the devil is in the detail. Suppose a family business member in one of those businesses is not performing well. How can you get that person out of the business? In a family setting, quite hard. So what kind of rules do you put in place, and how do you enforce those rules to make sure that the business side is shielded from internal family rivalries or sensitivities or what have you? Okay? And on the other side, the family-led institutions, around a family office, around philanthropy, around education, and so on. So a separation, if you want, between the business that's supposed to generate the wealth of the future wealth of the shareholders from the family institutions, and again, they typically revolve around philanthropy, wealth management, education, and what have you. These are very, very thorny issues to deal with because they are emotional. And you rarely get commonality of view very easily, which is why it's very important to address them, why there is a founding person or someone with legitimacy to, at the end of the day, say, stop it, stop the discussion, this is how it's going to have to be. The second part of the equation is around developing or charting growth strategy with the right to win. And again, here there are some very tough questions. Families have to agree on expectations around financial objectives. So, how much cash do we expect the businesses to generate? How much dividends are we expecting to go into the family pockets versus re-injecting in the business? There are questions around funding sources. There are questions around portfolio constraints. We will not go into that industry, we will not go into that country versus, no, we're much more expansive kind of strategy. Asset classes, business platforms, and what have you. So there is a variety of questions around the growth strategy that go beyond what a typical corporation would have to do. In fact, recently we were working with a family where the General Assembly, remember the people who had a stake or could have a stake in the family, there were around 120 of them. So roughly 120 cousins. And we just made the simple calculation that if they were to maintain the average, in 10 years, the average wealth that they had today, given the level of expenditures, the growth of the business would have to be year in, year out greater than 15%. There is no business that over 20 years grows 15% per year every single year. And that's why some tough choices and tough questions have to be addressed here. I'm going to touch quickly on one last topic, which is traditionally family businesses prefer the model of 100% control at the holding level, at the company level, and so on. And we think that they ought to be encouraged to start letting go of certain businesses or partially monetizing certain businesses with a view to re-inject into the businesses that will endure. This is one of the hardest discussions, again, we've had with the owners of big families, because there is an emotional attachment to businesses that have been started, by one's father or one's grandfather, and letting it go is seen as, a failure. And it would not be. I mean, economic conditions change, the competitive rules, the competitive playing field changes. And again, letting go of emotion in these kinds of decisions is kind of difficult. Now, I just want to close the loop on something, again, Your Excellency, that you touched on, which is female empowerment and employment. Again, no economy can sustain itself and be productive to worldwide levels over a sustained period of time when half of the population is not included in the active workforce. So, as we did this work and we started interacting, in fact, with both male and female family members, the thought occurred to us, can these companies, family-owned companies, be a perfect ground to start the inclusion or encourage the inclusion of female workers, female managers into the workforce? So we spent some time, surveying and having discussions with 30 families across the regions. Interestingly, 20% from generation one, the equivalent of the founding generation, some 70% from the second generation, and 10% from the third generation in 4 countries, Bahrain, Kuwait, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. And we talked both to female family members and male family members. By and large, we were trying to assess the role of women in, in those business, in the family businesses, and how involved they were in the family business. And think of it in, across 4 dimensions. A contributor to the daily business operations, a female member who has a job running the company, in the marketing department, in the finance department, or what have you. Or alternatively, as an enforcer of corporate governance. We saw in the family businesses a propensity to place female members on the boards of those companies. But within the context of the family, they could have other roles as well, a promoter of family culture and values, or quite active on the philanthropy side. The findings from this survey was that clearly there is a positive trend. Nowhere close to where it needs to be, but at least the trend is heading in the right direction. There is no doubt about that. But we saw that in those family businesses that we've surveyed, women tended to cluster in some specific functions, typically HR, typically marketing. And while we've been seeing an increase of the number of females on the boards of the family companies, when you really talk to them, okay, you're on the board, but are you really active on the board? Is your voice being heard? Then it was a totally different issue. They tended to be, self-recognition tended to be, they would say, we're certainly not as vocal or as involved as we ought to be. So it was more a fact of representation as opposed to an active participation. And when you dig a bit deeper and try to understand, what's limiting, what is the limiting factors in these? And so we try to ask, what are the top 3 barriers that you see in female members of families getting more involved in those businesses? Again, the red is as seen by the female member of those 30 families, and the pink is as seen from the male member of the family. The number 1 barrier was we're not feeling the support and the encouragement that we ought to have from other family members. It is unclear to us how decisions are made. They tend to be made, somewhere else in a place where we're not. Or, another issue which is common, I would say, globally, which is we don't have enough time to dedicate to this. We're really busy raising and taking care of the family. There was a perception shared equally around we need more training. We're on the board. We need more training as to, how do you act on a board? How do you represent the best interest of the shareholder on the board? The men's perception of the same issues were around, social acceptance. In my environment, this is not yet socially acceptable. Or, we're in this sector, we're in this industry, and this is not an industry or sector that's suitable, quote unquote, for female members to participate in. Okay. Now, if you think about it, the sense of history is that we should be seeing, not only hopefully, but really more and more of that involvement, and we absolutely need it. Social conditions are changing. The size of family, whereas, as you said, Your Excellency, in the past 10, 15, 20 years, the birth rate, population growth rate, whichever measure you took, was at the highest extreme of any economy in the world. But we're seeing now that the family size is getting smaller. Women are, on average, population is aging. It is still young by any standard, but the women of the second generation are now being in positions to take advantage of all of this. There is growing social acceptance, and frankly, there are many countries in the region where we see that the level of education of women is higher than the level of education of men. So there are factors that will push this in the right direction. And in fact, for this to happen, governments need to keep pushing the envelope as to social acceptance and really, breaking down barriers to entry of women in the active workforce. Men, family members should be supportive. If you remember, the number 1 issue was we're not being encouraged or supported in getting more involved. But equally, female family members ought to be much more demanding and saying, okay, I'm on the board, I want to have a voice on it. I need access to the information. I want to be able to prepare for that. So everyone is going to have to play that part for this to happen. So in closing, I mean, the whole issue of how family businesses survive past the third generation is important everywhere. There's a lot of studies on it, worldwide. But for the Middle East, it's absolutely essential if we are to crack the unemployment issue that we are facing. So thank you for your time, and have a great conference.